Hi, my name's Katie and welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about keeping a mixed species African cichlid tank. In the tank that you can see here behind me, it's a 6-foot water box tank, and I've got a mix of species that are endemic to Lake Malawi in Africa. I've got a mix of peacocks, haps and Mbuna in there. I wanted to make this video to talk about keeping these species together and some of the considerations that you need to make if you're going to make a mixed species tank. I've had these guys living together for about 10-11 months now, and I've had absolutely no issues keeping the different species together. There's two main things I'm going to talk about, which is their habitat and their diet requirements. Because these species all come from Lake Malawi, the water parameters are the same for all of them. So they all like having an alkaline pH. I keep mine around 8.2. They like water around 25 to 26 degrees, and they like water that's on the harder side, which is why it can be helpful to put things like sandstone, Texas holy rock, and crushed coral in the tank to raise both your pH and your carbonate hardness. So the first thing I'm going to start with is talking about their habitat. The peacocks and haps are more open water swimmers. Although they do like to dig around in the substrate and they'll hang around the bottom of the tank sometimes, and they like to have ornaments or rocks to be able to hide behind or rest behind at times. They do like to have open water to swim in. The haps I kind of think of as gentle giants. They tend to be the larger African cichlids. However, in the wild they're also predatory, so they will eat smaller fish, but it's not so much out of aggression, that's more so out of just wanting food to eat. Whereas the peacocks are kind of a little bit more feisty, I find, especially towards other peacock cichlids that are either the same colour as them or have similar patterns. So African cichlids in particular are known for conspecific aggression, which means that they're aggressive towards fish that look the same as them, basically. The haps, I don't really ever see any aggression from them. They're kind of just a bit dopey and swim up and down and lay on the bottom of the tank at times. That's really all they do. So in general, both peacocks and haps do pretty well together because, like I said before, same parameters, and also they like to have their open swimming space. So having a nice long tank, so horizontal space, can be helpful, and not too much stuff like blocking them from being able to swim through open water. But it's also good to have a few things in the tank because I do notice that at times they like to have a bit of a rest, or they might like to get away from each other as well. Another thing too to be mindful of in terms of aggression with these fish, particularly the peacocks, is just making sure that you have enough fish in your tank. If you don't have enough, then aggression won't really be diffused among the fish, and sometimes certain fish can get targeted pretty brutally. So having multiple fish kind of means that there's more going on in the tank, and it's less likely that one fish is going to really hammer and pick on one particular fish, because it'll be more distracted by the other ones. Having a wave maker as well on one end of the tank, or both, can be something that helps with that too. It just kind of breaks up the water a bit and creates a current, so the fish have some stimulation and something to focus on. In particular, I find that's helpful for the peacocks since they're such open swimmers. So now the Mbuna are more rock dwellers. The name Mbuna actually means rock dweller in Tongan. So these guys like to hang around the bottom of the tank a bit more, and they also like to go inside tunnels and caves. They kind of almost remind me of reef fish darting in and out of coral. They're pretty talented at being able to do maneuvers like swimming backwards or sitting vertically in the tank as well. The peacocks and haps, although they will like to take some cover and shelter at times, they don't tend to be like the Mbuna. They won't go inside the rocks and inside caves and stuff. They more kind of dig holes in the substrate and hang out around the rocks. Whereas Mbuna really like tunneling in there, and they can sometimes hang out in the rocks and you won't really see them. But they also do like to come out and swim in the open from time to time. They will especially come out if it's around food time. I'll see them kind of swimming, but they do always tend to stay pretty close to where their little territory is in their caves and don't go too far from there. they're not constantly swimming up and down like the peacocks and haps are. So for this reason, if you're going to be keeping peacocks, haps and Mbuna in the same tank, you want to be able to have the best of both worlds. So ideally you'll have a tank that's large enough to be able to create a cave system on the bottom part of the tank, but also large enough to have plenty of swimming room horizontally and also open water. So that means that your rocks aren't jutting out all the way to the top of the water surface. By doing this, you give the Mbuna their own little place that they can hang out, and you also give the peacocks and haps their swimming space that they need, but also rocks that they can sit and dig holes and stuff next to. And also, I touched on this point slightly before, but Mbuna are similar as peacocks in terms of aggression. They do tend to target fish that are the same colour or have the same pattern as them. I haven't particularly seen Mbuna and peacocks be aggressive towards each other. The only time I have seen this is when my OB Mbuna and OB peacock have seen each other, especially the ones that kind of have like this white kind of yellowy colour to them, because they do look quite similar. But again, it's very minimal aggression, nothing crazy where they're biting fins off or anything like that. It's more just a, hey, kind of get out of my way type of aggression. So that's pretty much it for habitat and environment. In terms of diet, the dietary requirements of haps and peacocks versus Mbuna are quite different. So haps and peacocks, well actually I guess the best place to start is that all Lake Malawi cichlids need to have fibre in their diet. So all of them will eat plant matter and algae, and that helps them with their digestion. But in particular, the haps and the peacocks need to have some protein or some meat in their diet as well. They do quite well with that. On the other hand, in the wild, Mbuna tend to eat and graze on algae more often. And what can happen is with any of these species of Lake Malawi cichlids, if you give them too much protein and there's not enough algae and plant matter in their diet, then they can be susceptible to something that's called Malawi bloat. Basically what happens is they can't digest the protein and the meat properly, and their intestines get all blocked up and they kind of blow out like a balloon. And if they can pass the food, then they're okay, but sometimes they can't, and unfortunately it means that they pass away from it. So even though haps and peacocks can do with protein in their diet, you always want to make sure that you're including some fibre. So in general, keeping a mixed species tank, I don't ever feed live or frozen foods like brine shrimp, blackworms, bloodworms, things like that, because to me it's not worth the risk. I find that if you do feed that stuff and you've got Mbuna, sometimes they will go for it, and then you risk them not digesting it properly. And being so susceptible to Malawi bloat, I just don't think it's worth the risk. What I do is feed all of my fish a pellet diet, and every pellet that I give them has a mix of protein and algae like spirulina or maybe kelp in it as well, or I give them a pellet that is only algae based. And I find that just giving the fish the mix of this stuff is great. I haven't had any of my African cichlids ever get bloat, and I haven't lost any fish from anything like that. And I've grown them all up from being pretty tiny, little, almost kind of like fry as well, and they've done well on this diet. I find that if I introduce a new food to them, then they sometimes won't eat it for a little while. It can take them like 3-4 days to get used to it. So if you did have a tank of, let's say, peacocks and haps, and you were only giving them things like brine shrimp or protein heavy foods, and you wanted to swap it over to something with a bit more algae in it, it might take them a little while to actually get used to it. So ideally, your fish will be able to, they'll accept pellet foods, and pellet foods that have that mix of fibre and protein, or just fibre like algae-based pellets. There is another food that I feed as well, which is absolute colour. I have a video on this food if you're interested in seeing what it's done for my peacocks and haps in terms of making them more colourful. This food is not a great quality pellet. I literally only feed it to help with colour. It has like a lot of fillers and stuff in it, and it doesn't have any fibre in it, or kind of like algae based stuff in it. So when I feed that, I notice that the Mbuna don't really go for it. But if they do, then they've got enough algae and stuff in their diet and fibre in their diet to be able to digest that just fine. It's not too protein heavy or anything, because the fillers are more things like cereal and stuff. So I guess that's like carbs, I suppose. The other thing too is I intentionally grow some algae on my rocks as well. I used to have blackbeard algae, which I didn't like, but my fish liked it, so I kind of put up with it, and then I got bristlenose catfish and they devoured it all, so it's all gone. But I do have some green algae that sits on my rocks, and I do notice that my cichlids like to graze on that throughout the day. So I kind of like having that mix of the pellet foods and then the naturally occurring algae as well that's in there for them. And so I feed these guys twice a day as well, once in the morning and once in the evening. I find that making sure they've got enough food available to them is something that helps keep aggression levels down as well, because if the food is scarce, then I think they start to get a little bit competitive over it. But if food is plentiful and they've got enough, then they're pretty happy. But then to keep up with the large bio load that I've got, I just make sure that I do regular water changes. So normally every 7 to 10 days, I'll change at least 50% of the water that's in there. And that just helps keep on top of things like nutrients in the water and nitrates in there. So all in all, I've really enjoyed having a mixed species tank. I haven't had any issues at all keeping the different types of species together, and I guess I have had them since they were babies, so that's probably something to consider too, if that's made a difference, having them kind of grow up together in the same tank. But really my observations are that the peacock cichlids are aggressive to the peacocks and the Mbuna are aggressive to the Mbuna. But in general, my aggression levels are pretty minimal. I don't have any crazy aggression issues or anything like that. Just, I guess, a healthy amount of aggression where they're aware of each other and they'll chase each other around and stuff, and that gives them some stimulation, but not to the point where my fish are getting absolutely destroyed and beating each other up and stuff. You can probably see behind me in this video how they kind of interact. You'll see them chase each other around every now and then, but in general they're pretty peaceful and pretty relaxed. I think that keeping all of the species together has its pros as well. I think it's really interesting seeing them interact with each other, and also seeing the different types of cichlids and how they interact with their environment as well. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. If you would like to see more content like this, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. And if you found the video to be helpful, please give it a like and let me know what you thought in the comments down below. If you've got any questions as well, please let me know, or any advice, tips, things like that. And I hope you have a lovely week, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.